Hello, everyone. So, welcome to Grief, having the hard talk between men and women. I'm Ann Moss Rogers, and Moss is my first name. It's a double name, it's a Southern thing. And I'm from Mental Health Awareness Education. I'm a mental health speaker, a suicide prevention speaker, and a suicide loss survivor, having lost my son, Charles, who took his life in 2015. My panelists today include Michael Overly, the founder of Dogs and Men, focused on working with dogs and men to bring emotional confidence and love to all beings. Then there's Carla Helbert, a bereaved mother and a licensed professional counselor focusing on grief and loss. And Tony Lynch, founder of Memories of Us, dedicated to connecting men with resources and holding space with men who have experienced loss. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ann Moss.
Thanks, Ann Moss, for putting this together.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to dive into the topic of grief and why it's hard for men to open up, and that relationship and sort of the friction that happens between men and women after a traumatic loss. And my hope is that you kind of come away seeing things from, a different perspective, because we all kind of see things from our own traumatic perspective. So you want to go to the link in the comments that you see to watch the live stream if you're at, and you can watch from any of those spots. Tony, do you have anything to add since you're very accustomed to this platform?
Yeah, they can watch it on any of the platforms here. If you can see the LinkedIn. You can watch it on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, on either Ann Moss's or my own, as well as Twitter and Rumble.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot. And I am not seeing it on my own LinkedIn at the moment, so I am a little concerned about that.
It should start streaming through there.
Okay. Oh, well, we're going to go ahead and get started, and maybe if it doesn't show up there, then I will put the recording up later and it will show then. But I wanted to start with the difference in expression and communication, and sort of explore some of those nuances in how men express themselves and communicate compared to women, because we women kind of express our emotions outwardly, right? I mean, we're kind of maybe usually more straightforward because culturally that's how we've been raised. But I'd like to kind of start with the two dudes we have here on that sort of feeling of overwhelming grief or any overwhelming feeling from trauma, and how that might be expressed instead of, maybe talking a little bit about avoidance or other things that you might do to kind of hide those feelings if that's kind of where you went at first.
You want to start off, Michael?
Sure. So you hit the nail on the head right away, Ann Moss, that we're definitely raised differently. Men are not supposed to express those feelings and emotions. We're supposed to be stoic and tough, and be the provider and be the one that fixes everything. And so when these things come up, most of us, we don't even have a vocabulary for how to express it. Even if we knew how, we don't know what words to use. We don't know how to associate our feelings with those words. So this vocabulary is this gigantic missing piece for us. Secondarily, how do we do that? How do we feel safe expressing now when we were told and raised in a way where that wasn't actually safe to do? We'd be seen in this whole other light. There's a lot of shame around it that comes with that, just like there's shame around mental health and a lot of these other issues. So it's very difficult for us to be able to, one, open up, and two, be even able to express what we're actually feeling, because we just don't even know half the time.
Tony, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, most definitely. And Michael, he hit the nail on the head there, as well. A lot of times what happens is that the perception versus reality. It's not that we don't know how to express ourselves, it's how we express ourselves. And we have to go back to when we're children and when we're told as young boys, you better stop crying, or I'm gonna give you something to cry about, right?
Yeah.
What does it go to? What does I go to? To puff out our chest, right? And we hold it in. But what is the one thing that we do? We get angry. We want to go punch something. We want to go destroy something, right? And so when you can associate the two, you realize this is how we express it. Now, to someone else looking in, it looks totally crazy, right? It looks as if we got anger issues, which in turn, as we begin to get older, this is how we express ourselves. So you have to know what you're looking at when you're seeing the men in your life go through or dealing with things that we cannot verbalize. It's more of a physical thing, right? We shut down, but we're more physical. We go and want to put together cabinets or things like that.
Yeah.
And that begins that is the way that we express ourselves.
Okay, Carla, you've worked with both men and women. What differences do you see, especially right at the beginning?
Well, I think both Tony and Michael have some really good points. And I also think it's really important to understand that we can't really paint with a broad brush every single man is this
Right.
way, and or one way. And Kenneth Doka, who is a grief educator and has written several books, and I cannot right now remember the name of his book, but he talks about somebody in one of his classes brought up the differences between men and women grieving, and he, really thought about it and wrote about this in one of his books. And he talked about really it's more about styles of grieving, and that he broke it into two categories of instrumental grievers and intuitive grievers. And the intuitive grieving person tends to, and most of us are a mix of both a little bit. The intuitive style is more like what we imagine a feminine or women's kind of style of grieving and expressing would be. It's a more talkative, more emotive, more crying, more comfortable with talking about feelings. And then the instrumental side is the doing something, like putting together cabinets or putting together, like my husband, when our son died, he did a lot, and he's actually very comfortable with expressing emotions. He's good at it. He's a writer. But one of the things he did is he put a lot of energy into cataloging and putting together all the pictures and videos. He put together like a book of not a book, but like a file of all the cards and things people sent. If it had been up to me, that had all just been like in a big pile and never would have been able to go and do that. But when I went to my first support group meeting, I really wanted him to come, and he went. And afterward, he's like, I don't ever have to do that again, do I? He didn't, but he's actually a huge help to me in a lot of ways. We've even taught workshops together now on writing your grief, because he's an excellent teacher too. So, we're all of us really are a mix of the two. And it's interesting, and because you've seen this too, Amos, when we run groups, there's obviously almost always way more women, but there's always that like handful of men who really want to talk about it. And it's interesting to see them show up. I always have men in support groups. They're fewer, but to see this, and to what Michael said as well about not knowing what to say, there's also that part of trauma, especially when it's been traumatic grief, that people lose their ability to even find words to be able to say what they're feeling. And it certainly is true that we're all raised differently. I feel, so bad for men and boys because they're told, they're raised in these ways where it's not okay to express your feelings or express your emotions, or, you know, be affectionate towards your male friends, or, you know, there's all these ways they have to kind of get around that, or, you know, they don't have those outlets that a lot of women do in their intimate friendships. Like I remember when shortly after our son died and my husband went back to work, he teaches at a university, and people who don't even know me would stop him in the hall and be like, "How's Carla doing?" But nobody said, "How are you?" You know?
Right.
And still, when he starts talking about our son, a lot of his male friends just like shut down. They just change the subject.
Right.
And that's also part of like our culture that is very uncomfortable with grief, but also a problem for men that it's not safe for them to be expressive of their emotions. Sometimes, you know, they get lucky and they're raised with a lot of women, or they're raised with families that are more emotive and expressive. Like some families are that way, but it just depends. But overall in our culture, there's not a lot of space for it. And, you know, like, and they don't still, and you see it more. You got a lot of stay-at-home dads now. I went to the grocery store on Sunday, and there were all these men with their babies shopping. And I was like, you know, that's not, I mean, you see more now, but it's still like not the norm, you know? And
it isn't. And I think the big thing, especially with the friendships, like you mentioned, I noticed that. So I was talking to another man, he had lost his child, and his best friend walks up, and as soon as they start to talk about his son, the best friend walks off, and he looks at me, he goes, "He's done that every single time for the last 2 years, and it's driving me crazy." There is this discomfort with that men have being in the space with other men who have faced such a trauma, such tragedy. So it's really discomfort with sitting with somebody else in their tragedy. And that's what I would like to see change. So there is a photograph from Henrico, Virginia. And I love this photo, and I've tried to reach out to the photographer because I want to use it. But it has one of the students has died, and it shows all these students outside. So you see the boys standing off, and they're like got their hands in their pocket and their faces down. You look over to the left, all the girls are hugging each other. And it's not that what the boys are doing is wrong, but they look more uncomfortable, and they look like they really want connection. And the girls are knowing them automatically to go for it. But it's kind of like the guys aren't allowed to. And I think we need to understand and not raise our boys to toughen up, because that just makes them avoid and avoid all emotions. So when grief comes up, and it's a traumatic grief, like from a child, when you react so differently, it can be very divisive.
Oh yeah,
Especially if you have kind of thrown a lot of stuff in the closet before that haven't dealt with it. Once that grief event turns up, there is no more doing that. It all comes up to the surface. And I don't think we see high divorce simply, and the divorce rate is way inflated for parents of bereaved children, but it is higher. And I think the problem is more that you were able to brush some of it under the rug, but after the big grief event, you're not, because nobody's putting up with that stuff then. Because you started off on this whole new life and your whole new self. You're reinventing yourself. And I find that to be very difficult, but I would love to dive into the avoidance piece. Because a lot of people think being strong means avoiding it and not connecting with others, when in fact, it really takes more courage to connect? How can we communicate that message to our males, you know, and encourage them to understand that when they come to my groups and they share, I am listening. And I'm not only listening, I am learning. And so their shares are helping me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe if we phrase it in a way that, do you understand that by participating, you're helping other people? Would that be a way that we could present it so that we would see more men in our groups? Or is that just not their thing and they want a same-sex group? What are your thoughts on that, Michael and Tony and Carla?
Well, I think that, you know, Carla already pointed this out. There's not a one size fits all. So, but I think making it an invitation to participate and letting them know that, hey, this isn't just for you. You're going to help. You can help a lot of people with this as well, because a lot of men they're fixers. We want to fix the problem, right? We don't necessarily want to deal with the problem, but we want to fix it. So if we see that as part of a solution that we could actually help to provide from someone else, that might be a good way to crack the door for a lot of people.
Yeah, I really like that. I think, and one man was telling me that they have an all men's group and they call it a discussion group, not a support group. So I think one distinction we can make is we can change support to discussion. So, Tony, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, there's a lot of variables that go along with that. My work is primarily with men, and what I find a lot of times, the reason why they don't go to a lot of groups, Michael, you said it. You hit it on the head. Men are fixers, but when you surround us with females, we become competitive to one another, and we tend to push our own feelings and emotions off to the side to focus more on helping the women in a group, you know, because we don't want to burden you with what's going on with me, right? This is the mentality. And a lot of times we are taught through examples from situations. Whenever we do try to open up, the people that our mothers, our sisters, our girlfriends, our spouses, etc., they tend to negate what's going on by first starting off the conversation, well, when you do that to a male, you've just now closed off every part that we try to open up to you, because now you've just pretty much said, regardless of what you're going through, what I'm going through is so much worse. So I'm not going to focus on what you're going through. That's why I started the conversation off with Well, think about that for a minute. Men already have a hard enough time opening up. So when you take that part away from it and you started off with, we shut down. Now we're going to listen to you. We won't ever go back to touch on that subject again, because you just now showed me how important my emotions truly are. And it's not intentional.
What would be a good example of starting that conversation so that you didn't feel like you needed to shut down right from the beginning?
Primarily, not saying anything, you know, listening, showing up. I often tell the women I do talk to, if you want that man to open up to you, you want him to talk to you and things like that, a lot of times it's just okay to sit there and listen.
So allow for those long stretches of silence and not be uncomfortable with them, but allow them time to process.
Right. Allow them time to be able to open up to you. Allow them time to be able to feel comfortable so they can talk to you about what's going on. Because when you ask me a question like, hey, how are you doing? I'm going to do it one of two ways. And that depends on what you've already done to me. Right? If you've already cut me off, I'm going to look at you and I'm going to tell you the biggest lie that I can tell you. I'm fine. I'm good. And that is the truthful part about it. Because for one, why would I waste my time to tell you what's going on with me when you're just going to take it around and make it about you? I'm not going to do it. Right? Now, if I come to you and you ask me, how are you doing? And you just sit there and you allow me to express myself. Oh, I'm gonna tell you everything that's going on with me, my day. And then from there, the conversation moving forward, I will be a little bit more open and vulnerable with you about the things that are going on and bothering me in my life. But again, we are taught these from a young age. So it's kind of hard to go back in and correct the things that you've been taught and to develop a different frame of speaking or understanding how to verbalize what's going on with me.
Yeah. Carla, what's your take?
Well, I mean, I'm just listening. And I was thinking too a little bit about, one, it's really hard for most people to sit in silence and let people just
It
talk.
is.
That's hard. Like just communication skills in general for humans is really difficult in our culture. And I think it's very different when there's, you know, a difference in how the people involved in the conversation are grieving or how close they are to the actual grief event. When you're talking about couples, it is very difficult. And which is why, I mean, I'm not a couples therapist, but I do see couples when there's shared grief. Because a lot of times I mean, that's my expertise area for one thing. And it's a very different thing than just general couples counseling. But a lot of that time is spent in like allowing and giving the space for each person to be able to talk about how they're feeling and be able to give space to listen to their partner's experiences. Because, you know, the stress of being in, particularly with traumatic grief, like grief is not pathological, but when you have traumatic grief, when there's a death of a child, especially, but also when you have like a sudden death or a suicide or violence or homicide, it is in both the people involved in a couple situation are very close to that loss. It can be really hard to be able to have just on your own space and time and ability to be able to listen and give that time and space and to say, how are you? You know, and I remember like in my own relationship, and it's weird because it's like if I was having a really terrible griefy day, I didn't want to talk about it with him because I didn't want to ruin his time or day or make him feel worse, you know, and vice versa. So a lot of times we just didn't talk about it. Like we would talk about our child. It's not that we didn't bring it up, but we didn't talk about our own personal experiences as much, especially when they were really strong, because I didn't want to make him feel worse than he already felt, and same for him. And, you know, if I was having an okay day where I felt, you know, less griefy, I just was like, I don't want to go there. And it was, you know, it's so hard to find the space and time and those safe places. Like for anybody that I'm working with, my job first and foremost is to make sure that they feel safe in talking, or they're not going to tell me anything. And that's true in any conversation. Like you don't have to be a therapist for that, you know. So like Tony was saying, if you just come at somebody and say, how are you? Like really, how are you? And you listen to how they are, and maybe you talk about their day or you talk about other things, or you listen to what they're telling you about something else, then they're going to feel more comfortable that you're a safe person that they can talk to. And that, you know, that takes time to establish that kind of a relationship. If there's already a relationship, maybe changing that, if that's not been the way that you communicate, that takes some effort to be able to change that around, to be able to say, hey, how can I help this person that I love and care about feel safe in talking to me? And we were talking about being vulnerable. You know, most people believe that being vulnerable is being weak.
Right.
For a lot of men, and for women too, to expose your emotions that way makes you weak. And like you said, Moss, that's really not true, but we've been so conditioned to believe that that's true.
Right, right. I remember really pouring out my heart one time, and we're in the kitchen, and I'm crying, and my husband leaves the room, goes outside, comes back in, and starts talking about the weather. And I lost it. I'm like, I need you here with me to talk about it. And I need you to hear me. And he goes, well, I didn't mean to. I just wanted to let you know about the weather. And I said, right when I'm like opening up my heart, that was I needed to know it was 73 degrees out there. And, he keeps trying to give me these excuses. I'm like, I'm not buying it. You were avoiding me. And, I want to know why you were avoiding me. I need you. And I think once I said, I need you, I saw a change. And he comes up and he gives me a hug. And it's like, that's what I needed. So then I was kind of saying, when I'm like this, come give me a hug, hold me, so that it felt like he was more useful.
Yeah, that's a good point too, of letting, as a woman and as a female partner, letting a man know what you need from them.
Right.
Is really helpful. Because I mean, y'all keep saying you like to fix things, and oftentimes that's true. But this is a thing you can't fix. Generally grief at all, you can't fix it. And so being able to say, as partners and as a couple, for each other, what does the other person need, and being able to say that. I mean, yeah, I work with a lot of women, and you see that dynamic. And what happens, the difficult thing that happens is the woman assumes he doesn't care, and that's in my experience never been true. It's just they don't know what to do or what to say. Or you're right, like your husband going outside and looking at the weather, that avoidance, not even maybe knowing that he's avoiding because he feels uncomfortable.
Right.
And so being able to say those things to each other really is important. And that's a hard thing for people to do, period. Like you're talking about the divorce rate. You're right. Like it's not as people think, oh, your child dies, you're getting divorced. That's not true. If you already have some serious problems in communication, there's already a lot of other stressors that you've not been able to deal with, and those are piled up already. And then this huge stressor of the death of your child gets like put on top of that. The amount of strain, potentially the relationship can't take it. And a lot of that has to do with the inability to communicate appropriately in the first place. And then it just gets harder when those really intense emotions that, when we go through traumatic grief, none of us know what the hell is going on. Like it is really difficult to navigate. Even though, I'm a therapist, I was a therapist before this happened to me. I took classes in counseling and death and dying and grief and bereavement. And when it happened to me, I was like, I was not prepared. I was not in any way prepared by my studies or my degree to be able to deal with this. Like nobody knows how to deal with it.
No, there isn't. And I do want to talk about, so when I go all over the country, I speak to a lot of audiences, and I have a lot of men come up to me afterwards, and they usually will talk about the only way I could make it through the day was with drugs and alcohol, usually alcohol in my experience. And they'll say, and it made it all worse because once I kind of decided that was a problem, I had to start my grief journey all over again. So I've kind of noticed that in some instances, and again, you can't generalize, it tends to take men longer. And I think we need to be more patient. Like my husband said to me, or said to somebody else not too long ago, he said, grief is like two mountains. My wife, she's on the second mountain. I'm still on the first. And I thought that was really an interesting illustration. One, because I had no idea he saw it that way. And it wasn't until he said that to someone else that I knew he even felt like he wasn't at the same pace. But I think we need more patience and with our men, especially because it is such new ground. And I would love to hear what the dudes have to say about the drugs and alcohol and about all that. What do you think?
Want to piggyback off that, Michael, and I'll piggyback off
Sure.
you.
I want to go back to one other thing that you had said to your husband, Ann Moss, and it was about you needed him, and you told him in that moment that I need you. So for us to be able to ask for that ourselves, to be able to express that is extremely difficult because we're not supposed to be needy. And that's another thing that's kind of, beat into us from an early age, and not every single guy, but as a societal and cultural expectation, that's kind of how it is. So for us to be able to actually say, I need this, and ask for what we want, that's very difficult. So
Yeah.
and as far as pacing grief, it's the same concept or perspective on pacing anything in a relationship, whether it be, this person may be more available to be open to love than this person at a certain time. But I think we have an expectation that, hey, this is where I'm at. Why aren't you here with me?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, being on the same page at the same time. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's desirable, right? I want you right here. I want you right next to me so we can do this thing together.
Yeah.
And we don't verbalize that expectation. It's just as something I have inside of me, but I don't express that to you. And that's another thing that we can't read each other's minds, and guys get really, really super sensitive around that.
Yeah. I remember we were moving. My son died 4 days after we sold the house, so we had to move. And he kind of checked out when it was packing, and I got angry. But then when we actually moved in and all the paperwork needed, that's when I checked out, and he kind of stepped up. So I think it's recognizing that when one is on and one is off, there's a reason for that. Because a lot of times, let's say you have other children or you have animals in the house that need caring for, that person can step up because they're not in the really dark hole at that moment. And I kind of wanted to go in tandem more. And when I saw that it didn't happen that way, I needed to figure out the advantages of it not happening that way. I actually had to write them down to be okay with it. And once I did, I was like, I do see that it's okay that we're never on exactly the same page at the same time.
I'll piggyback off that for a second. Now, coming from a place as a bereaved father, when my son passed away, I was in a relationship. What had happened is that at 6 months after my son passed away, the individual that I was with, she said something to me, which actually turned me off. She goes, "It's been 6 months. Don't you think that you should be over it by now?" Now, those words right there. Now here's where the understanding comes from, and the education and learning how to have gratitude and patience with other individuals when you're going through something like that. If a person has never been through a situation like that, of course their expectations are up here, right? They've already put a time limit on you. So what happens in a lot of cases is that we try to reach that time limit. It doesn't happen. We already know that grief is not linear. It doesn't have a time limit. It doesn't have any rhyme or reason or a blueprint. So you instinctively have to go with what you know. And sometimes what you know is it's not always going to look pretty to someone else.
Right.
Right? So what you may see me do, you may see me isolate myself. You may see me turn to drugs and alcohol. The question after that becomes, is that always been my go-to when something traumatic has always happened? If the answer is yes, this is what you're going to go through because it's familiar to you, right? And it's not for you to judge me about how I handle the things that I go through, because for one, it's unfamiliar territory to me. And I'm doing something that's making me feel safe in the environment and the situation that I'm in. Now, granted, over time, there comes a time where you have to become a little bit more self-aware, but that does take time. That takes understanding from all aspects. When it comes down to your friends, and depending on how your friend is, again, the scenario is the same. If you've never experienced it before, how are you supposed to show up? Did anyone teach you how to show up? Did anyone say that, hey, this is what this looks like and this is the natural response to it? Or are they doing what's been taught to them? See, again, you have to look at the whole picture and not not the scenario, right? You know what I'm saying? You have to play this thing out. Everybody's going to be different. You know, especially now, if you've been around people who have experienced those things, again, their approach is going to be totally different because of how they perceive the loss that they've gone through. They're going to go, well, this is what I did. Well, what you did may not work for me.
Right.
And so, again, when I feel isolated, it is instinctively for me to go into survival mode. And in survival mode, I have to become a version of myself that you may not like. Until I'm comfortable and able to move with this thing or grow with this thing, I don't know who I am. I don't understand the world that I'm in. Everything has changed. All the dreams, all the things that I had planned out are no longer there. Everything that I thought was possible or impossible, like, you know what I'm saying, child loss. No one ever thinks that they're going to lose their child, right?
Yeah.
So when it happens, your world now changes because now the order of events are now out of place.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I in this world now? Because in that world, I was a father, and my only goal is to be a good parent to my child until they got old enough to take care of themselves.
Right.
That is now done. Who am I in this scenario now?
I think that one's universal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was universal. And so what we do is that we overthink a lot of scenarios and we add unnecessary parts in there instead of looking at the universal aspects of it and building upon there.
Right.
And that's where you can open up the doors, right? You don't have to go this way and that way and this way. Look at the universal parts. And then when you're on the opposite end, ask yourself, if it was me, how would I want to show up in my space? And then become that. And then
what do you mean? What do you mean for the person? Well, when you say that, what do you mean? Who asked themselves? Like your girlfriend in this scenario, or who?
Well, that goes with anyone. I can't speak for everyone, but I would say that can go for anyone. And what I mean by that is that depending on the person that you are, because you know when you were adults, you've already gone through your fair share of trauma and things like that, right? What we fail to look at is who did you need in the time that you was going through it. Right? You want to have an open dialogue. You want to have your mind open to everything that is coming into your space, and everybody's going to be different. But who did you need when you were going through it, and you had to become that person in order to help you feel safe, right? In that space. So how can you show up in that other person's space? And what that does, it causes a big sense of empathy and compassion to come in and understanding. Because if I came into caller space when you were going through it, not understanding, you know what I'm saying, the full aspect of what was going through, and certain words, I could push you away from me. Now, coming from a place where I've gone through my fair share of trauma, I can show up in your space and go, what do you need? I'm not comparing my story to yours, but I'm coming from a place of saying, this is what I needed. And I wish somebody would have said this to me. So I'm going to be that person that I needed and ask the simple questions. What is it that you need?
That would be great if people would do that.
Right.
You know, like going back to what you're saying about your girlfriend at the time. I mean, I don't know, maybe y'all are still together. I don't know, but saying it's been 6 months, aren't you over this? And then, you know, then you said, which I think a lot of people say, I hear clients say this all the time, oh, they don't know any better. That is true. A lot of people do not, and they've not been in that situation. You know, but I'm thankful because my son died in 2006, and that wasn't like ancient times. Yesterday was 18 years he's been dead, which is unreal to me. It's crazy to think of. But then there was even less support, less awareness, less educational opportunity. Now there really are a whole lot more places that people can go to try to understand, you know, what the people they love are going through. Especially like in your situation. And I see this a lot when there's like a parent whose child has died, and then their partner is not the biological parent. They're either, you know, girlfriend, boyfriend,
Right.
step parent. They're not having the exact experience. I mean, even two biological parents are not having the exact experience.
Right.
But other people, you know, and I've seen in the comments yet that somebody said, yeah, a lot of us go, and it's true that people don't understand, or they walk away, or they can't, they think there's some time limit on it. And that still is true. But there are more places people can go now to try to understand and learn, okay, what is this like for this person that I love? And then to be able to have the compassion to say, what do you need? And the patience. And a lot of people don't have that. And so like that's one reason that I think conversations like this are really important, because it creates more places and spaces that other people not grieving can come and say, well, what do I do to help my partner, my boyfriend, my brother, my friend, my coworker, my teammate, my whoever, you know, this person that is going through this. And a lot of times people, like I call myself a grief activist, because like that means somebody who's trying to raise consciousness and let people know. I mean, that is one of my biggest things, other than working with people when they're in their own grief journey, helping the larger community and the world understand what this is like is a huge mission of mine. And so now, you know, I'm sorry that she said that to you, because that's so painful when we're in that place and somebody says, oh, aren't you over this yet? And, you know, it's hard for us in that situation to be the educator. We might not even know what to say,
Because
but
we're so emotional.
on the grieving person to have to say, oh, you know, I need you to get educated. I need you to learn. Or it's not, why should I be past this? Because people don't want to think about it. Like it's when people say, one of my pet peeves is this, I can't imagine. Yes, you can. You don't want to, because it's so scary and hard. And somebody said, oh, it's like we're contagious. It's because they don't want to think about it, because that means if you think about in detail, you can't know what it's like, but you can try to imagine what it's like. Then you have to imagine somebody you love deeply dying, and that is terrifying. So people run away from it. So it's that learning how to be in the discomfort that all of our culture needs to do. And it's hard. And then when you're in a couple, you know, you're in a couple together, and I'm made uncomfortable by how I perceive your grief to be moving, and you might be uncomfortable by how you see me dealing with the grief, then we're both uncomfortable in extreme discomfort at the same time. And it's, you know, that place of trying to find that space of empathy and compassion and patience can be so hard to find. And which is why most of us can't do this on our own.
No, and I think that's where the isolation becomes a problem, and then the drinking and drugging, exacerbates that. But I wanted to look at one of the comments we have here, and it says, "Do you have any suggestions on how to respond when one spouse is talking about the child who passed with regrets and looking backward, which is very painful, and the other spouse feels like it's a dagger, like they don't want to talk about the child?" And I've run across that not as much as a couple, but as like other people, when I start talking about it, they walk away, and allowing that person to feel heard when the other person is kind of trying to avoid that pain. Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
That's hard. I have not lost a child, so I can't speak to it in that context. Um, I I lost my older brother, who was kind of my hero, about 6 years ago, and uh, even friends that were close to me did not understand and didn't know how to discuss that or talk about it. People in my own family didn't necessarily want to talk about it because it was too painful for them to bring up, as Carla mentioned already, you know, bringing their own grief into a situation where they don't want to experience that, and whether they've had that or not in the past, it's one person's availability to be discomfort, their openness to experience that again. I think most of us try and run and hide from pain, right?
Right.
It keeps showing up, right? Life happens. That ball's going to keep rolling, but we try and avoid it so much that I think we just don't know what the heck to do with it when it does show. So it's very difficult for a lot of people to talk about.
So when other people you wanted to talk about your brother, maybe with other family members, is there a way to frame that, or do you just pick safe family members who are willing to listen and just kind of let the other ones be? I mean, do you have any suggestions around that? Because there had to have been times where you just wanted to talk about those memories with someone, you wanted to remember him, and you got shut down. Were there people in your circle who didn't shut you down?
Yeah. Well, two actually. So one was my mom. She, so that was tough on her because that was actually the second child she had lost.
Oh.
And the other was literally my dog. I could actually sit and talk to there was no expectation there, right?
That's so true.
No fear of judgment, no worry about, them getting up and leaving because they're uncomfortable. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. This is actually some of the work that I do with men and their dogs.
Yeah.
That is safe. That is a safe place.
Michael, when I train people, and I've talked about how to be with somebody in grief, it's like learn how to be like a dog, sit and stay.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And there's I won't go into it, but there's studies that show that grieving people who have animal companions feel more supported from those animals than they do by anybody else in their lives.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
We got a comment on Instagram. Thank you, Baby Lost Retreat. The comment reads, "You never get over it. We learn to deal with the grief throughout life." I relate to that. And going back to what you said earlier, I do appreciate that. That comment that my ex had said taught me something, right? Something really, really important that a lot of people, when you're going through something terrible, we sometimes forget it's not personal. When someone makes those comments to you and things like that, see, it's easy to react and have an emotional response.
It is.
What it taught me was to step outside of the reaction part of it and observe not only what I was going through in my life, but observe the people that were in my life. And I began to pay attention to them. Not because I wanted to comfort them in my time of need, but I wanted to have a better understanding of where they were coming from, right? there was those that understood. There was a couple men that came into my life that was like, hey, I'm going to give you the raw, honest truth. And the truth hurts. You know what I'm saying? Because there's some things that you have to face when you're going through that. And they were honest with me. They said, look, this is gonna hurt like the Dickens. It's gonna hurt more than anything that you've ever gone through. The process that you're going to go through, most people aren't going to understand, and they're going to say some stuff to you that you're going to want to get upset about.
Yeah.
The key to it is have some grace and patience with them, because it's not personal. They're doing the best that they can, but what they have to work with. And if they've never experienced the loss of a brother, the loss of their parents, the loss of a child, the loss of their friends and things like that, they may have only experienced their set of grief.
And I think curiosity. I think there's an element of curiosity there too.
Right. There's always going to be an element of curiosity, right? Because no one wants to intentionally insult you in your time of need. Not intentionally.
No, they don't.
So what we have to do as grievers, we have to not take it personal. There's going to be people that leave. There's going to be a handful of people that stay. You can't take the ones personal. They take it personal when they leave. They don't understand unless they've gone through it. And eventually when they do, because grief is one of those things, loss you're going to experience at some point in your life, right?
Yeah.
Who are you going to be when they need you? Just because they weren't able to support you in your time doesn't mean that you give it back in return, because then you create more pain.
Right. I think
because you understand just a little fraction of not what they're going through, but maybe what they're feeling. And maybe, just maybe, you can help give them the comfort that you needed, because we have to grow through these things in the new reality. We have to become different versions of ourselves.
So I wanted to go back to Debbie's comment for 1 minute and then make a comment on the Instagram one. I think one way to address it, and I think this is the way I did it, and I was talking to my husband, and I kind of stepped out of taking this emotional response and understanding that he was just struggling with where to be with all of it. Mm-hmm. And I just said, no one else loved our son like you and me. And it was our biological son. So this might not work like in a marriage where another child comes in. And I said, sometimes I just need to talk about the stories and remember the beautiful memories of who he was, instead of him being justified by the death. So that's why I bring them up. And I would love for you to add to that, or just engage with it in some way, however you feel. And that did help. But for you to express why you need them to listen again, they're fixers and they need to be needed, and to allow them to understand, I need that listening. I need this because I need someone else to know that it mattered, because lots of times when people stop talking about them, or they refuse to talk about our loved one, the first thing is you think they didn't count, nobody remembers them, and you push harder. And if they would just listen and allow you to feel heard, you can have that conversation. And it doesn't have to be 30 minutes, it could be 3 minutes. And if you leave an event, a party where somebody has allowed you that few minutes, it makes that entire experience, it just repaints it into just a beautiful experience where someone listened to me for 3 minutes. Therefore, the whole 2 hours I was there was amazing. And I think, and back to Tony's point, when you step outside of yourself and not react with that from me standpoint, but understand as an opportunity to educate. So my mother would say things like, and she was only curious because she'd not been through this before. And she's like, well, why would you listen to sad music if it makes you cry? So instead of reacting and getting angry with her, I said, well, sometimes I find a little corner and I think, oh, I have a little time alone. And I said, that's the only bond I have with Charles now, is those moments of grief. And if I'm listening to music and it kind of gets me in touch with that part of myself for just a few minutes, I feel him with me. I don't have any other way. I got all this love and nowhere to land. So that just makes me feel that love and remember it. And when I was able to kind of explain to her, she really appreciated it. And then I started to understand her comments came from a place of she just didn't know what to do. And she was asking me directly. And at first I was kind of taking it as an insult. So like Tony said, I learned to step outside of the reaction, but just observe, which is insanely difficult.
Yeah, this is it's very hard.
It depends on the individual, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, not everybody's going to do what Tony did. This is why I do the work that I do. I developed these skills, right? I did. So how I developed those skills, it's not going to be the same as everyone else. Because this is why I do the work that I do, because that was part of who I am. I'm gonna share a story with you. You know, I've known Michael now for a couple of years, and you know how we met. He was on my podcast, and he shared a story about losing his brother, and realized that we both lived in Colorado, right, in northern Colorado. I would tell you, the first time I met Michael, we didn't say too many words. Tony, Mike, how y'all doing? We embraced each other. That was the most comfortable I've ever felt around anyone else, because it wasn't the verbal words that was being spoken. It was the connection that was made, right? You know what I'm saying? I knew right then and there that he's not going to judge me. You know what I'm saying? And we sat down and we talked. We ended up having lunch. We ended up sitting there for a long time. And I think if you look at that scenario and you place it into a more open scene, most people, this is what, this can be the catalyst to a lot of things, being comfortable.
Yeah.
Being able to not say anything, but be in that moment with those individuals. And to not take it personal when a person can't be in those moments with you. I just look at it and go, it's not for them.
Yeah. They're just, anyway.
Right.
Carla, what do you think about all this?
Oh, I think it takes time to get to that place where you can do that.
It does.
And, like I hear a lot of these stories, and I have my own experience. I was for a long time not able to not take things personally. I was difficult. Can you imagine, Amos? But
I really can, because you're
God, that's so funny.
So easy going. I mean, you're my easy going.
Well, do not have a problem imagining that, but it's very hard because it takes. I mean, grief. I also like to talk about grief as a developmental process, and when you're first in that space, you don't have the roots or the strength to be able to stand up for yourself and say, no, this is not for me. That's not how I experience my grief. I'm not going to take, it took me years to get to a place where I was like, yes, these people do not, for the overwhelming majority, do not mean to cause harm, and be able to see it in a different way. And I work with a lot of people who are in those places, and they're also, because they are so vulnerable and so in these places where they're already so wounded, that sometimes you just have to have your boundaries and protect yourself, because you're not in a place yet to be like, oh, I'm not going to take that personally and it's okay. And they just can't be there for me. It can be painful when those people who are mean the most to you, who you really hoped and thought would be there for you, are not, and they're causing you more harm. And you have to look at it just like with Debbie's question. It's hard to answer her question because we don't have all of the details, but I don't know, but there may be, and I don't know which spouse is which, and it doesn't matter. It might be that the other person who's feeling the daggers, they just are not in a place to be able to hold that yet. And maybe the other person needs to find other places where they can express those things. And you're talking about looking backward and having a lot of regrets. Those are parts of us, especially when there's been a traumatic loss or suicide or overdoses or those things where you have a lot of questions and the regrets, like you're saying, you have to be able to process that. But it may not be with your spouse. Maybe you need to find other places where that's a safe space. And then, approach it, in smaller pieces with the spouse, because you do need to be able to communicate. But it's hard and it's so painful, and we need to have safe spaces. And in the beginning, we're not in the place where we can just like have that psychological Teflon that you can learn to develop and grow over time, and be able to have that strong back and be able to say, no, they're not talking to me. I can do that easily now, but it took me a long time, and so I think for people hearing it, it might be like, well, that just sounds so simple, but it isn't simple.
Right. And I don't mean it to sound simple or anything like that, because Lord knows it's definitely not like that. With the work that I do in the grief field, I often put myself in the people that I talk to. So it changes my language. It changes the way I approach certain people. I'm very adaptive in my approach when it comes down to it. Right. You know what I'm saying? Because I have to know how to pivot, because I'm not trying to push you away. I want you to be able to feel comfort in the space that we're in. So if I'm talking with Michael, my conversation with Michael is going to be totally different from when I talk to Mike. Right. You know what I'm saying? My conversation is going to change across the board, because everybody's going to process that. My conversation is going to change when I talk to my spouse. It's going to change when I talk to my sister and things like that, because it has to, and what I mean by that is that I have to know how to communicate with you, because I want to give you the courage and the strength to be able to open up and feel comfortable with talking with me. Right. You know what I'm saying? So I have to be universal in my approach. Well, not universal, adaptive in my approach, and know how to pivot, know how to back out of it to keep you engaged, so I don't make it about me. Right. Yeah. And again, these are things that you learn over time. Not everybody's going to do the same thing. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy. I mean, not everybody's going to get into the grief field. Right. Not everybody's going to become a trauma recovery coach. Not everybody's going to become, get into doing this sort of work. You're going to figure out what works for you. And that is the most individual thing about grief. You can't do grief like Tony did it, or like any of us did it. You have to do grief the way that you do it. And a major portion of that is community, people that you can connect to on that level, right? Because it changes the conversations.
Well, I like what Carla was saying about finding that safe person that you need in that moment, because there were times where my spouse wasn't my go-to. It was my best friend, Martha, who kept her door open, and she could kind of move around to where I needed to be, because I've known her since first grade. I mean, we're so emotionally aligned because of the amount of time we've known each other. But I will tell you that when my husband and I went to a group together, he didn't say a lot, but when he did speak up, he would say something that I heard in a completely different way.
I bet. Mm-hmm.
And that was really interesting perspective, is that when we did try grief counselor for a while, and while that a group was more helpful for me, I will say that when he said stuff in there, I listened from like it's not coming at me, and I reacted less like it's a dagger to me. And it was interesting. I processed it differently. And I think that was what Michael was talking about earlier, is that connection and coming together piece of it that was so effective. So I did want to talk about the vulnerability and intimacy. And, there was a man who reached out to me, and it's not always men and women, but it's typically men going, my wife doesn't want to have relations. And the woman saying, how could he ask that of me? And this guy named Gary comes on, and he just says, that connection with my wife just makes me feel whole again. It makes me show that I am capable of love. And the difference in how we see that, and our ability to see how each other feels about it as well. So it may not be intimate relations, but it may be just a hug or some other expression. But do our men need those intimate expressions that are just hugs? Or, how can we start to kind of tease apart all that part of it? Even if it's, if you've lost a brother and you have a partner, that partner is not going to feel the loss in the same way you do,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I think men have a difficult time separating out, sex and nurturing and love and a lot of those other things. It's a place where we get all of that wrapped into one.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to being able to ask what we need. We have a hard time asking our partner, hey, would you mind rubbing my neck? I really like that. Would you mind? It's just hard for us to do. It's the simplest thing, right? It's a small thing, but it's not small for us. So when it comes to that deep bonding feeling we get when we're having sex, making love, whatever you want to phrase that, there's a lot wrapped into it for a lot of us. And that there's a connectivity that we don't feel in other aspects of our life. Mm-hmm. So I can see where he's coming from, and then I can see her side, like, this is just not something I really want to do with you right now. Why would you even ask? Right. So, and that's goes back to our basic communication of being able to express ourselves and ask for what we need.
That's really beautiful, the way you express that connectivity. You really encapsulated that well. Thank you, Michael. Tony or Carla, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll let Carla go first.
Oh, it comes up a lot. I mean, and yet again, so it's like there's nothing we can say is a one size fits everybody situation. I know for sure, particularly with bereaved parents, this can be really a difficult hurdle. And it's really interesting, like when I work with people and I hear what you tend to hear very often is that women, before want to have sex with somebody, especially when it's your partner, need to feel that emotional connection. And for men, they feel the emotional connection because they've had sex, right? It's like this weird opposite polar thing. And it's like, okay, well, how do we figure that out? And I think a lot of it is communication. A lot of it may be too, like, well, how do we lead up to that place? And, particularly when babies die, and this might be true for older children too, that act, a lot of women connect that with, this is how my child was created and my child is now dead and all of these things. And it's, I mean, I remember, you know, the first couple times, maybe more than a couple, that we, you know, had sex after our child died. I just cried and cried and cried and cried the whole time, you know, which is okay. You know, it's fine. But it was, that's all I could think about, you know, and it's just like, he's not here anymore. He's not here anymore. Oh my God. Like, it's just, it's so different for men and for women in that situation. And I think it can create, you know, a big chasm between us, especially when we're scared to talk about it. Like, people get scared to talk about it, and then not talking about it and not approaching it becomes this huge stressful thing itself. And then we just don't talk about it at all. And then it's, you know, bigger than an elephant in the room. And then it's like, what do you do with that? And I think that being able to, again, have a safe person to discuss this stuff with is really important. But the little things, like you said, rubbing your neck, or just the hugs and the kisses, or, you know, a lot of times I'll just like have people, you know, just, can you like hug each other, and then like, just how long can you just hold each other and like press your hearts together? Just that alone, or like gazing into each other's eyes, like that intimacy and that rawness, like it's hard to withstand that sometimes when you're so broken open. So it's like, how do you learn how to trust each other again in that space? And it's really, it takes a lot of work, and that trust is such a huge piece of it. And being able to talk about it is one of the most important things. And it's a huge piece of, I think, relationships between men and women in grief.
Yeah, it is. Tony, what are your thoughts?
I'm coming from a different perspective, right? You know what I'm saying? From my own personal experience.
Sure.
When my son passed away, of course, I had the girlfriend at the time, 6 months. I eventually left her. We just decided to part ways, going about our business. Now, on the other side of that, I had a really, really amazing teacher, which was my son's mother. Now, what I mean by this, she was a true narcissist. This woman destroyed everything that I was, destroyed me. And what it did, it pushed me into a place of isolation, because she had taught me something that I don't think I would have ever learned had she not been who she was. So I began to, over a period of time, develop a sense of appreciation from her. As far as intimacy, I wanted nothing to do with anyone. Nothing. So I learned how to avoid conversations when it came down to women. I knew how to keep to myself. I knew how to move very quickly. If I needed to go to the grocery store, I knew to get there and get back home. I didn't go out. I'm not trying to socialize with no one. I was comfortable at home. I had everything that I needed. I had food, I had my gym, I had my TV if I wanted that, and I had my bed, because I spent a lot of times on the floor crying, balled up at the wall.
Sure.
But now, in that lesson, it was something that oddly was profound about it, that I understood. And this is the reason why I didn't want to be around or have a relationship for up to 6 years. Hurt people hurt people. Now, when you've been hurt extremely deep, you kind of come from a place of, I'm not going to do this to someone else. At least for me, right? But that's what makes me the person that I am in the space that I'm in. Because I understood through in that isolation, I grew, I learned, I began to become more in tune with my emotions. So I became emotionally intelligent in that aspect. I became more aware of myself, because I knew that I couldn't ask anyone else to figure me out, because I'm not looking for validation from you. I need to figure me out.
Yeah.
Until I do that, I'm not going to be any good for anyone. I'm not going to be any good for my sister. I'm not going to be any good for my friends. I'm not going to be any good for anyone. And that's where I learned how to show up with myself. I learned how to hold space with me. Before I learned how to do any of that with anyone else, I had to go through that myself. So being in that space, being isolated, no, I didn't want anybody to touch me. Don't touch me.
Oh yeah, that's common too. I mean, this is again, there's no one answer. I see a lot of people who are like really isolated. I don't want anybody touching me. I don't want to share any piece of myself, because again, it is this open intimacy, and that feels scary to some people. I mean, there's not any one thing, but
Yes,
and then the opposite of that, you see people who will go off and just be like chasing everything, because that is like a way of avoiding, like it's an avoidance technique, men and women. I mean, and this is not for any one, gender.
Right.
This happens to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And still, I mean, I've worked with people who go through this because it is a way of connecting, but also a way of avoiding your feelings. And it's a situation where you have, spouses, often, very rarely are they on the same page sexually. There's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, it's a very multi-layered and faceted situation, that it's not just a physical act. Maybe it is when people are using it for avoidance, but that doesn't really work out well in a couple situation, especially when you have shared grief. But then you might have like somebody's brother has died, and then their partners don't understand the grief, or parent, or who knows, whatever, and then that person needs to be very understanding. There might be all sorts of nuances involved. Like it's a complex thing.
For sure. It is. But I think it's when men are allowed to feel, and with some other females in conversation, we've talked about, well, that's when we can get the man to talk about their loss, is right after. So sometimes when I've talked to women, I'm like, think of it that way. You're going to get that part that you need to out of it. But if you go on forever without trying it, or without, connecting in that way, the relationship will start to falter over time. And then it becomes this big thing of, well, how do you get back together? And so if you keep up, even if it's kind of stuttered and, awkward, to keep up some fraction of that when you can, because once you lose that intimacy, you can really start to drift apart. And it's so complicated with so many layers, because I do know in one instance, there was a mom who reached out to me, and her husband didn't want to have any relations. And her son died by suicide. And so she went out and had all these affairs. Because this isn't like me at all. And she tells me all about it, and she's so ashamed. And I said, I would talk, and then I linked her sexual experiences. She decided to watch some film footage that she had no business, she should have never been allowed to watch, but it was film footage that included the death of her son, and no one should have ever signed off on that, but they did. And those sexual encounters followed that viewing of the film. So in her case, Carla, it was the avoidance. She was trying to avoid, and she was trying to find some time where she was avoiding, and can I still feel numb. And until I asked her the question of, when did you start having all these affairs? Was it after you watched the film? She was just like, oh my God, yes. So she just didn't put two and two together. Is that being, an avoidance strategy? And they actually, she ended up telling him, and they worked through it, believe it or not, because she's like, it was like within months of her son's death, which was a pretty awful. I mean, there's no suicide's good, but this was just catastrophically bad, with a lot of news media involved, making it even more complicated. So thanks for engaging. This is a really tough topic, and not many people talk about it. But we couldn't have men and women, you know, event without touching on it. So I wanted to sort of end. We have 10 more minutes, but talk about some strategies that men and women, so they can kind of come back together, or learn to give to one another. I mean, what kind of stories or focus do you see in helping people develop more vulnerability with each other? In other words, as you go through this, you can shut down and stop growing and just stop living. Or you can recognize what you're going through is the process, is you are fixing the pain, that the pain that you're feeling are the building blocks to emotional healing. How do you, as a couple, or as a brother and sister, or as just men and women in general, how can we start to open up these conversations and make it more normal, other than having events like this?
Men, what do you have to say?
Mike, do you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Go ahead.
It's something that I developed when I was growing through my grief. I began to hold on to other people's belief system, their faith, because mine was shattered. But I used to watch and observe how they was showing up in life. They're going through something so hard, right? And if they were good people, if they were learning how to smile and have great conversations with people, be open and vulnerable, I knew I wasn't in a place to where I can do that. So I learned how to hold on to their belief system till I could develop my own. So that is something that happens over a period of time. And I would say, for anyone out there, men or women, surround yourself with people who are a little bit further along to you, and observe how they show up in life. And if they're showing up in life in a way that is positive, that made them a good person, it's okay to hold on to that a little bit till you're strong enough to develop your own.
I like that. So, and I did that, finding people who've been through it before. Carla, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think sometimes writing things down is easier than talking about them.
Yeah, I did a lot of that. That's good.
And so even like writing, and again, it depends on the relationship. Like my mind keeps going back to like a couples scenario, but and I don't know. I mean, there's other situations, obviously, like you're saying, somebody's sister or maybe their mother. And then depending on your relationship, you're going to approach it differently. But writing maybe letters to each other in a couple situation. And even having prompts, like my friend Joanne Cacciatore, just like a new deck of cards came out that are grief prompts. And it's really great. It's like different categories of things, like getting there's lots of those kinds of like card decks out there. And you might even find like support group talking points or something, and just sit down with each other, pull a card, and then each of you answer that question. And because sometimes we just don't know what to say. And then you can even Google, like, writing prompts for grief, because this stuff is all over the internet.
Yeah.
And you don't write it, but like pull one up and it's a question, and then maybe you talk about it. I mean, sometimes just like little simple things like, what's I remember blank. And then you lead with that. What pops up in your mind when you think I remember? And then you just tell it to each other. But then that requires kind of setting aside time and being willing to like have that space with each other. And maybe you have some, and depending on the situation, maybe you have some ground rules around it. You know, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, it's like a safe word, but for grief instead of like,
Right. Yeah.
so it's like, okay, I'm feeling way too vulnerable. I need to take a break. Maybe you have a way of saying, you know, let's sit down and for 30 minutes we talk about something and then we have dinner or whatever. Like being able to create some kind of structure to be able to talk, because sometimes it just feels so awkward and we don't know where to start. And then like we both said, like, you know, if we're having really terrible days, we don't want to bring him down or, you know, make it worse or make him feel like he's got to do something. If we have, okay, every Sunday we're going to sit down and talk to each other for 30 minutes before dinner or whatever, you know, whatever the thing is, and maybe start there. I mean, because it's just difficult. It's a very hard conversation to have sometimes. But, you know, learning to communicate and understanding that everybody's got a different perspective, which can be hard because it feels so like you're the only one having this experience. And if you have a spouse, it's like, well, surely you must feel the same way because you're my child's father, but they don't. I mean, we all have a different, like you said, nobody loves our child the way you and I love our child, but even so, there's different experiences. Oh no, Michael went away.
Oh no.
I really wanted to hear what Michael had to say.
Hopefully it pops back on.
Yeah, I hope so. So I hear you saying that really kind of being more intentional
Yeah.
of holding that space. And I really, really like that idea because I think that men who really love structure, you know, our left brain, our engineers, our accountant types, which can be men or women, to be honest with you, might like it if it's scheduled and they kind of know what's coming. You know, we're just gonna go through these cards or these 3 prompts, and yeah, I really like that, and I think that'd be a very healthy exercise for you know, if it's a couple situation, or even if it's brother and sister.
Yeah, or a family, you know, it just,
Mhm.
and it's going to be a different conversation depending on the relationships. There he is.
He's back.
Like I said, I'm not going. I'm out.
Well, we have 3 more minutes, and I wanted to finish up by allowing each of you a minute to say, where can we find you and learn more about you? Tony?
You can find me on Facebook as Memories of Us, LTD Grief Support for Men. You can find me on IG as Men's Grief Support. You can find me on LinkedIn as Tony Lynch. I'm all over there. Or you can check out my podcast, the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast on YouTube. Other than that, I am here.
Okay. Michael, where can we find you?
Well, I just found myself again. My internet cut out. So if someone wants to ask me a direct question, you can email them at michael@dogsandmen.com. I'm on LinkedIn at Michael Overly and Facebook at Michael Overly.
All right. Carla, what about you?
I'm just, my website's carlahelbert.com, and I'm also on Instagram. It's Carla Helbert, and I'm on Facebook, Carla Helbert. This is my name. Just, I mean, you can find me on any of those things. I'm also on LinkedIn as well. I'm not as active there, but as I am on Facebook and Instagram. And if you go to my website, every page has a contact form, and if you just fill that out, if you have a question or whatever, it comes directly to my inbox. So.
Well, really appreciate you all being here with this conversation. I love everybody to follow me on LinkedIn. That's my main focus, but you'll find me on Instagram and Facebook and my website. And I hope you all will join me for another conversation. And Tony, I don't know how to end this because it's not Zoom. So if you would do the honors.
Not a problem. For everyone who is tuned in, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for the comments. Please go and check everyone out and let them know that you guys saw the episode over here. maybe we can do this again. Until next time, guys, thank you again for showing up and allowing us to have these difficult conversations. And until next time, you guys have a great day. Peace.
Thank you.